All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with the October meeting of the Finance, Efficiency, Economy, and Sustainability Subcommittee. We'll start this meeting like we always start the meetings of this subcommittee with the pledge. Vice Mayor Waring, would you please lead us in the pledge? Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so I have Vice Mayor Waring with me here in person, and then we also have Councilman Valenzuela on the phone right now, and then Councilman Nowakowski will be joining us later as well. All the members of the subcommittee were provided with the minutes of the September meeting. Do I have any additions, corrections, or a motion?
Move approval.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Councilman Valenzuela. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes of our September 17th meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Items 3 and 4 are for information only. We don't have any presentations planned on these, but do my colleagues have any questions or comments on these items? All right, these two items provide kind of a rundown of what this subcommittee's been doing over the last couple of years, and also a up-to-date list of all the efficiencies that have been obtained working with our employee groups, our private sector members of the task force, and I just want to thank everyone who's been a part of this and encourage the members of the public just to take a look at both of those documents and see what's been accomplished through the efforts, again, of staff and the council, mayor, and members of the private sector. So with that, we do have item 5 is for consent. Unless my colleagues have any questions or comments on that, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion second. Has been seconded. Any discussion on this item? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. This now takes us to item 6, which is the MOU with the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce for coordinated business outreach. We have Paul Blue with us today.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you. I'm here today with Christine Mackey, our Community and Economic Development Director, and Chad Heinrichs, who is the VP for Public Affairs and Economic Development for the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. And we're here today to talk to you about collaboration. Clearly, the council has told staff that one of your #1 top priorities is economic development. And as I know we have discussed with you in the past across the last couple of years, staff firmly believes, and you have affirmed, that our existing businesses are the key place we can start, and we should start. They aren't people we have to sell on investing in Phoenix, employing in Phoenix, giving in Phoenix. They're already here doing that. The second thing is that economic development is a team sport. There is no we do it ourselves. There are many collaborators in the successful in that kind of a successful endeavor. And when you're working with existing businesses, and it depends on who you talk to and how you measure, but there's anywhere between 50 to 70,000 businesses in the city of Phoenix. There is no possible hope that the city of Phoenix on its own can strategically reach all of the most important members of that business community. We need to do that together, and we're here today to talk to you about how we would like to formalize a relationship with one of the parties that we have been doing business with, but we want to more formally both acknowledge and kind of help set a pathway that we can collaborate together in the sharing of information. And we want to both share that with you and get your advice, feedback, and approval. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Christine.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, council members. Thanks for having us here this morning. I am here to talk to you, we're here to talk to you about a strategic relationship that we are working to memorialize and formalize, with your permission here today, with the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce relating to business retention and expansion. As Paul Blue just mentioned, probably the most important thing that any economic development organization does is a strong business retention expansion program. About 85% of your jobs come from your existing companies. So you want to encourage them to grow in market, you want to encourage them to retain their qualified workforce and educate the workforce that exists there today. So as we look at moving forward, you will see, with council's guidance and direction from the strategic initiative last February, you will see us putting together a very robust economic development business retention expansion program. It really, and people say, well, why? They're already here. Why would you go out and visit with them? What difference does that make? Well, if anybody's here to tell you that there aren't other cities in our backyard right here today trying to take our companies away from us, encourage their expansions in other locations, someone is fibbing to you, because they are here and making those efforts as we sit here today. Also allows the opportunity to help our existing companies through any challenges they might face. And those might not be economic challenges. They might be things as simple as a traffic signal's not working for them, a bush needs to be trimmed, the road in front of them isn't functioning appropriately, a railroad track is too rough for them to move over. It really fosters that relationship with your local firms. And from an economic development and relationship standpoint, having a strong relationship with your local companies is one of the most important things you can do. Not only does it keep them here, but it makes them the ambassador for your community moving forward in your attraction of new companies into the market. It makes them very comfortable in revealing to you who their vendors, who their suppliers, who their clients are, that you can then look at in enhancing and modifying your cluster strategy. It really does enhance Phoenix's reputation as a great place to do business. As we look at our existing companies, they really are what drive the overall health of our companies, of our community. If you look at residential, residential is wonderful. We love our citizens. We love their location that they've selected to be here. But when you look at the services, at the cost of services to provide to them, about 83 cents of every dollar you spend on your residential services is recouped by residential alone. When you look at your office and industrial opportunities, between $1.06 and $1.10 is recouped for all of your services you provide to them. It provides those good quality jobs for your citizens, so then they can spend their money in the community and sales tax comes back and enhances our efforts in our parks and our police and streets. And it also allows us that opportunity to really focus on business relationships and finding out what we can do to help those businesses who might have a minor perception of something that they're struggling with. Also allows us to bring information to them on access to programs that are available. We actually have a pretty good toolkit now that exists at the state level that can help our existing businesses grow. They're not just meant for those new companies and those headlines coming into the market. They really are meant to help our existing businesses. And I don't think quite often a lot of our existing businesses really understand quality job tax credits or quality facilities credits or the state job training program, and how with their expansions in market, with their new capital investment in market, they do qualify for those same programs. And we want to make sure that our great Phoenix companies know about those programs as well. So as we look at a coordinated effort with one of our strategic partners, we really say, why would we put together a strategic partnership program? Well, I guess the answer back would be, why wouldn't we? Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce is a great partner to economic development here in the city of Phoenix, and we are excited to put together a collaborative effort in being able to strategically go out and meet with our companies, not only together, but to create a methodology by which we will capture the information, whether we're out on visits with our council members who are always excited to see the companies in their districts and in the city of Phoenix, where our economic development staff goes forward, whether it's the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce that's out on a visit by themselves, or whether we strategically partner to go on visits for our top 50 to 100 companies to go out and see those. We have a number of other entities that are in the market as well that do those collaborative visits with us. And as we started talking, really realized that it was probably in everyone's best interest that we have kind of a coordinated effort going forward. You hate for the Greater Phoenix Chamber to be in there one day and City of Phoenix to come in the next day and the Arizona Commerce Authority the next, and you know, so forth and so on. So if we have a strategic calendar of who's visiting and when we're visiting, if we look at a common repository for information, so as you know, Paul Blue mentioned, we have tens of thousands of companies here in the city of Phoenix, and there's no way we can see all of them each and every year, and there are strategic companies we do need to see. But often our colleagues can go out and see other companies that we don't have the opportunity to see, or we've seen companies they don't. And if we have a central repository for the information and we can collaboratively share that information backwards and forwards, it's in our company's best interests as we continue along. Putting together a marketing strategy, you know, kind of tying ribbon cuttings and support for our companies together and moving forward is what we see coming out of that MOU. As an example, if you look at CED's efforts this last year, and a formal report will be forthcoming to each of the council members. We just closed our 13-14 Business Retention Expansion Report, and a formal report will be coming forward to you. 206 companies were visited, 1,885 new jobs were created, an average salary of $38,957, but 40% of those jobs had greater salaries greater than $50,000. We had sector partner membership meetings, sector partner strategic meetings on our base industries. In 14-15, you will see us more than double those visits. Our strategy goal, what I've challenged the team with, is just our internal team without our great partner here is not less than 500 visits. And we're continuing to move those forward and meet with those companies. We'll work off of the top 100. We'll work off our major employers list, which is those who employ greater than 100 in base industry in the region. We'll work on key sectors, and we will be working on companies who are exhibiting challenges. We may read about them in the newspaper, we may get more notices, we may hear about them from our council members that they're hearing that some of our companies are facing challenges, and those are ones we'll focus on very quickly to get in front of. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague from the Greater Phoenix.
Thank you, Christine. Mr. Chair, committee members. Thank you. Mr. Chair, committee members, it's my pleasure to be here today with you to look at this partnership that we're creating with the City of Phoenix, and certainly a pleasure for us to be at this point. The history on the program from our perspective dates back a couple of years where we started working on the strategic plan for economic development and how the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce would engage in that effort. And we wanted to work smarter rather than harder. So one of the first things that we did was we explored a gap analysis. Who's doing what in economic development in Phoenix and in the region? And one of the key findings was business retention and expansion was an effort that was being undertaken, of course, by the city and the Arizona Commerce Authority. But as Paul had mentioned, the resources available to do this effort are honestly short. Even with all of our partners together, the resources will still be short. So working smarter rather than harder, the strategy is to really align with our partners and work together on those visits. And as Christine had mentioned, there are a number of tools in our toolbox between the city, the state, and other businesses and entities that by bringing those together in a coordinated fashion strategically to the businesses that we can help will be much more effective. So we're pleased to be a part of the partnership, and we're looking forward to moving forward with the agreement with the city, and I would be available for any questions outside of that as well. And I guess I would close with the last slide, as Christine, helpfully turned the slide for me. What do we look for as a result of this? There are a number of achievables, as Christine had mentioned, for results from the city's existing program that we plan to add to. But really, the benefit is that we're growing from within. We're increasing the investment of existing companies in Phoenix by providing them the resources that they need at the time that they need them, and creating the relationships so that we know when they need the resources. They know who they can contact, and those resources can be made available as necessary. And what's the overall objective? Of course, it's increasing the average wage in Phoenix, increasing wealth within the city for all people, and growing jobs from within. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm available for any questions.
Wonderful. Questions from my colleagues or comments? Vice Mayor?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilman Nowakowski?
I'll make a comment on, well, what a great approach. I mean, I call it the Team Phoenix approach, where we bring in all the different partners and we really do that customer service, and we're being proactive. And I really think this is doing business with the heart. And I think that's what Phoenix is all about, is showing those individuals that have invested in our city for so many years that we're here to back them up and to tell their stories and to tell our story as the city of Phoenix. So thank you so much for that support. Thank you for this great program. And I really think that we're gonna grow within, like you said. I mean, this is a great opportunity for us to really build those quality jobs within the city of Phoenix. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other comments from my colleagues? We do have a card from the public, so if it'd be all right, I'd like to invite Greta Rogers to join us.
Thank you, Chairman Gates and members of the subcommittee. I'm encouraged to listen to this and to hear it, but I'm more encouraged by knowing that Ms. Mackey came from Chandler, a city that has eaten our breakfast, lunch, and dinner for over a decade, as have Tempe and others. But Chandler has been numero uno. So if she's been involved with Chandler for that number of years or more, she should know how to hit a home run. And I hope we can begin to practice and learn how to and execute home runs, because this city has sat on its posterior and hoped, and nothing materially good has happened in the ED area. And that's shameful for a city of this size and magnitude of population. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. One question I had was, are there additional costs to the city of Phoenix associated with this MOU?
Chairman, great question. No. This is a strategic collaborative partnership that is in our constituents' best interest. And so we'll be partnering without any additional revenue needed between the two of us. A business retention expansion program is already budgeted within the CED effort. So we'll be moving those forward.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, though, I would add, and maybe Chad can elaborate, that the chamber is actually working with its membership and other interested stakeholders in the community to raise additional funds that they will apply to their level of effort. And maybe, Chad, you want to elaborate a little bit.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Chairman, and yes, that is a great question, and really there are additional resources from the Greater Phoenix Chamber that will come to be a part of this. As you'll note in the agreement, we dedicate full-time employees to the effort of business retention and expansion. That's part of the Phoenix Forward program, which this is a key part. And so we have been engaged in raising funds for that effort over the past few months. We're looking at a 3-year campaign a capital campaign to launch the effort, and then we look to sustain it after that. And this is a key part of that. Really, it's a two-pronged approach that we're taking with the Phoenix Forward program. The business retention and expansion piece is essential because of the industry intelligence that we're going to be able to gain from the companies that we visit and from collaborating with key partners that are doing the same work. And that is what I call really the bottom-up approach, learning from within, learning the issues that existing businesses are addressing and helping them move forward. The other side of that is looking at specific industries and really focusing on those industries to start. And I'm pleased to say that the industries that we are focusing on align very well with the strategy that the CED department here at the city is also doing. So we're seeing great alignment there. So the top-down approach is really convening industry leaders on industry councils in 3 sectors, and those are advanced business services, which is generally finance and insurance, transportation and logistics, and then also in healthcare and bioscience. So we've already begun work with that over the last 6 weeks. We've brought together some of the key executives from our own companies here in Phoenix to really flesh out what some opportunities are from that level as well that we can be working on. So we think that this is going to come together really well, where we're gaining information and industry intelligence from both the BRE visits and the work of the leadership in the industry councils. And again, glad to be a partner with the City of Phoenix on that effort.
Another question I had is, so when you talk about in the materials here, it says that you all will have 2 dedicated staff members assigned to this effort by January 2015. So these are staff members that are just going to be working on City of Phoenix issues?
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. The staff members will not solely be working on City of Phoenix companies, so to speak. This is somewhat regional in nature. So we look at our partners with the city and with the Arizona Commerce Authority, and in our alignment, we may find it beneficial to partner on some visits within the city and some that may fall outside of the city. So I don't want to make that promise, but those staff members are dedicated to the activity of business retention and expansion.
Well, again, unless any of my colleagues have additional comments or questions, I'm thrilled about this. I love the strategic thinking that you're talking about here, which is what we need. We do have a lot of resources. We have a lot of tools in the region, but they're sort of spread out, and so to be working together and to continue and deepen the relationship that the City of Phoenix has had with the Chamber, to me, is a no-brainer. And quite frankly, you all have this expertise in this area, and we ought to be tapping into it. Again, I do not have the philosophy that the city has to do everything with our own employees. These type of partnerships, I think this is yet another example of right sourcing. So in a very positive way. So with that, unless there are any other comments, I would entertain a motion on this item.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next, item 7. This is the dependent eligibility verification audit for employee health plans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just take a moment and introduce Assistant Human Resources Director Mary Kyle. Recently, I promoted Mary to Assistant Human Resources Director because we want to focus specifically on a very important cost driver to the city, which is our benefits program. And the specific part of the benefits that Mary is an expert in and will help us with strategy on is healthcare, workers' compensation, and those related issues. And this is one item that is a part of that Mary's bringing forward. It's something that we haven't done before, but we should do as a best practice to ensure that our costs are in line and that we're only paying costs that are actually need to be assessed to the City of Phoenix. And so with that, I'll introduce Mary to tell you a little bit about this, this item.
Right. Thank you. So Chairman Gates and subcommittee members, what we're asking for is basically your approval to issue an RFP that would assist us in getting a vendor to help us with dependent eligibility verification. So it's basically an audit of our employees, making sure that the dependents that they have covered on our plan are really eligible to be covered on our plan. So we do offer comprehensive benefits, including medical, dental, and other insurances out to our city employees. And the combined membership, when you look at the coverage for employees plus retirees and their dependents, is about 54,000 covered lives. So we are a big plan here at the City of Phoenix. We do require proof of eligibility when somebody is first bringing somebody onto our plan. So if you have a new spouse or you have dependent children that you're bringing onto our plan, we do require a copy of those legal documents at the time that they're being covered. But claims expenses for ineligible dependents can add up to a lot of money and unwarranted expenses on the city's plan. So for example, oftentimes we'll have somebody who's trying to add a spouse onto our coverage when they already have an existing spouse on the coverage that was never removed. So this is part of the goal of this plan. So eligible dependents in our plan include anybody that would be a legally married, either same or opposite sex spouse, a qualified domestic partner, a child to age 26 that could include a child, a stepchild, an adopted child, or a child placed for adoption, a child for whom you have long-term legal guardianship, and a child who's determined to be permanently disabled, who can't sustain their own care. Those that are not eligible to be included on our plan, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but would be an ex-spouse, a legally separated partner, former stepchildren, common law spouse, domestic partners that are not approved through our qualified domestic partner process, siblings, parents, and grandchildren. So if approved, the selected vendor will conduct the audit for the City of Phoenix, and it'll include a very comprehensive communication plan out for our employees and our retirees as well. They'll also be required to have a secure process where individuals can submit those documents such as birth certificates, marriage certificates, those kinds of things that are needed to prove their eligibility. They'll also be required to notify participants when dependents are being removed from coverage. We also would require that they have a web interface that interfaces with us that would report the status of the results on where we're at, and then a means for at the end of the audit to provide us with an electronic file of those dependents that have been verified for coverage. So the estimated timeline for this is we'd like to get this RFP issued sometime in November or December of this year, bring back that recommendation to the subcommittee in either December or January, do our RCA in January of 2015, and then we'd begin the vendor communication process sometime in January or February, and that we'd begin the employee communication program probably in February or March or next year, and that would continue through April and May, and then ineligible dependents would be removed by June of 2015. So with your approval, we look forward to moving forward with the RFP process, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Vice Mayor Waring, I think you had some questions.
I did have some questions. First, a statement. Mary, well-deserved promotion.
Thank
so
you.
Congratulations on that. So what, I don't know how else to phrase it except like this, what are we actually expecting to find? And I hate to say ideally, because of course, the more we find, that
Ideally, we'd
implies
like
that
to find nothing.
we'd like to find nothing, but then of course we get, I mean, I assume the ultimate goal is to save city money where we're spending where we shouldn't, so kind of a mixed thing here. What have other cities, I'm sure, have done this, so what have they found?
They have, and usually what the vendor tells you is you're going to see a savings of anywhere from 1% to 3% or more, but most of them will guarantee you that you're going to see some savings. So I would tell you most of them will guarantee that you're going to see a 1% savings, that it will pay for the audit.
So does that mean 1% of the people are cheating or just making mistakes, or is there a sanction if you get caught and you have an ex-spouse on there? Because I can't, some of it, okay, I can't see how that was an accident, but then some of the situations I could see, you know, you didn't take off a stepchild, you just didn't think about it or something, I suppose. I mean,
Right. So in the past, we have made folks that we've found that have had an ineligible dependent on there. We've gone back and we do a claims history check on them, and we look to see what we've paid out in medical, dental, and pharmacy, and those folks have repaid that. And I'll tell you, in some instances, it's very, very expensive
yeah,
for
I'm sure
those
it could be, yeah.
employees. But there are some changes with healthcare reform now on what you can go back and recoup on your costs. So I don't think we're going to see the full recoup that we've seen in the past, but just getting those ineligible dependents off there really is cost avoidance for you for in the future.
There's not really sanction. I mean, it's certainly a sanction to have to pay what you should have paid in the first place. But there's no employment sanction. I mean, even if in the worst case scenario, you find somebody who clearly added 2 people they knew they shouldn't.
We have done discipline on employees.
There hasn't this one,
Yes.
okay, all right. Right, so you've found, this has happened before.
Yes.
Just, you're expanding the scope.
Correct. So this would mean, normally what happens now is if you're adding somebody on, such as a new spouse or stepchildren that you're bringing on, or you've had a birth of a child, we require a birth certificate at that time when you're adding that individual on there. But if you take somebody like me, who's been with the city for 24 years, been married to the same spouse for the entire time, have 2 children, we're just making sure that those folks are still eligible for our coverage. So even though we've had them supply those birth certificates in the past, this is just really a re-verification of that eligibility.
How did people get, again, I hate to say cost because some of it could have been accidental. How did you find out about previous instances?
Usually they're trying to add somebody on. Sometimes we'll get an anonymous tip that somebody has somebody covered that they shouldn't have.
And I forget because it was kind of a long list and I didn't see all of it. How do foster children fit into this equation?
You have to have the legal guardianship for those foster children in order for them to be covered under this. So if you have that legal guardianship, that would
So they
suffice.
could be covered, you just
They
have to go
could,
through.
yes.
Mary and I spoke with the leadership of our labor organizations, and they were very positive about this happening because they recognize it's in nobody's interest to have people who are not eligible costing all those who are eligible money. So we feel good about early talks with our labor groups about their cooperation. The reason we want to talk about it early and often is this has the potential to be disruptive to employees because all 4 of you and all of us sitting around the table here will have to bring in birth certificates and marriage certificates to prove. Everybody has to prove. That's what the audit does. So that feels a little disruptive, but in the interest of the plan, it's important to do that. One of the reasons why it's good to have a vendor to do this is because they have secure portals. You don't have to bring your birth certificate and give it to Mary. It's done through very secure ways. So we think that this is a good way to do, but it's going to require a lot of communication, and that's another thing that will require of the selected vendor is a really robust communication plan that they'll have to work with Mary on to make sure all of our employees know. Because at the end of the day, what happens is, well, talk about what happens at the end after the audit's done. What happens to those people who haven't complied?
If those, normally what happens is you give folks, a certain amount of time in which they must comply. If they don't do it, then we're going to remove their dependents off of our health insurance coverage. So that means potentially you're going to have folks out there who have dependents, a spouse and children that are removed from coverage. Once they supply those documents to us, then we'll put them back on our insurance on the first of the month following when we get those documents.
So you got to give a lot of lead time, a lot of opportunities, but at the end there has to be some point at which you say, if you didn't provide us the birth certificate for your child, then we have to assume that the child is not allowed to be on the care until we see the birth certificate. That's really sort of the end disruption, and everything about the vendor is to help us avoid that as much as possible.
Councilman Nowakowski.
So is our system broken? I mean, when I was first elected, I had to bring all that documentation in and all those proofs. So is there a process once my child's 26 years old, not in school, that he's off the system? And why aren't we following that process? And what's going to secure in the future that after this audit's done, that we're not going to have to bring in another auditor in 5 years from now to redo this whole process? So can you explain the process, what's going on now, and how is this going to improve our process?
So, Councilman Nowakowski, what does happen is, you're correct in stating that when you bring that child on, we do require those documents at that time. And so the system isn't necessarily broken, but this is really something that's more just part of a good fiduciary responsibility for us to be doing periodically. So we are a self-funded health plan here at the City of Phoenix. That means that all of the money that we collect from our employees and the city's contribution goes into the Healthcare Benefits Trust. So what we pay in premiums, both the city's contribution and the employee's contribution, is a reflection of our entire population, the health of that population as well as the number of people that are on our plan. And so if you have folks that aren't eligible for that coverage and we're paying those costs for them, that's an additional cost to the city as well as to our employee members. So the system isn't necessarily broken. And to answer your question about what happens when my child turns 26, they're automatically going to come off of our plan at the end of the month in which they turn 26. So oftentimes what we don't know is, if you've gotten a divorce or you've been legally separated from your spouse and you don't notify us of that, we don't necessarily know that you should have taken that individual off of the coverage. So this is really just a really good means of due diligence and something that a plan our size should be doing periodically.
So my question is, that 1 to 2% that we're going to gain, what's the cost? I mean, what's the value of that?
The 1 to 2%, anywhere between 100,000 and 200,000 or more, is on the low end. And most of the vendors that I've talked to for a plan our size, they're thinking that we would see something much more than that. And that would be just in initial cost. What you could see kind of on the long-term end is that cost avoidance. So, easily we're going to see some considerable savings there.
And have we looked in the future of some type of a renewal of where I would have to prove that my kids are still living with me every 5 years or something like that? I'm just trying to figure out is, instead of spending these resources on an audit, should we have a staff person that is on an ongoing basis doing this and saving us a couple $100,000
Yeah, so
a
we
year
do
or
have
so,
somebody that does this on an ongoing basis when you're bringing people on or you're submitting your divorce decrees and those kinds of things with us. So there is somebody that does this on an ongoing basis, and your children don't have to live with you anymore to have coverage under the city's plan. So as a result of healthcare reform, that increased the coverage level to age 26 for dependent children, but they don't have to reside in your household. And they also don't have to have coverage, elsewhere. So it used to be when healthcare reform first came out and we were considered a grandfathered plan, if your child had coverage through another employer, then they couldn't have our coverage here at the City of Phoenix. But that provision has gone away, so now they could live out of state with another parent. They don't have to live with you to get coverage through the City of Phoenix. And I misquoted on saying it was 100,000 to 200,000. It's $1 to $2 million as a percentage to 2 percentage points for us.
And I think, Councilman, to your point, this audit provides us sort of a good reset. We've never done one of these before, and one of the things I asked Mary to do is bring us the best practices of good plans out there, and this is one of the things that they do. But to your point, then it also gives Mary a reset start with her staff to every year during enrollment to make sure we're keeping up with people and those sorts of changes.
I think it's great as long as we're going to have some type of a system after the audit to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. People pass away and all those kind of benefits also. So if there's some way there's a check and balance somehow where
There is, and we currently do that. The other thing that I would let you know is that the funds to pay for this audit are available through the Healthcare Benefits Trust as well, that we're not asking for new funding to pay for this audit.
Yeah.
Great questions. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? I think this makes a lot of sense. It's the right thing to do as a fiduciary. Being self-insured, it's important that we do this, and I'm sure we're looking at other things that we can do. Certainly, the Fit Phoenix program that Councilman Valenzuela has been leading is another part of this, because if our employees are healthier, that means healthcare costs are going to come down, and I'm really happy to see that, and I really appreciate his leadership on that. Before I ask for a motion, because I think we are looking for action on this item. You mentioned, Mr. Zerker, the workers' comp piece as well that Mary's going to be looking at. That's something I've been talking about a lot. My colleagues have been talking about. Last year, those workers' comp costs went up $3 million. It was one of those things that led to our budget deficit, and I hope that, you know, that's something that that we'll be seeing maybe perhaps in this subcommittee in the near future, some innovative ways that we can help to bring those costs down as well, because I think that is extremely important. So with that, I would entertain a motion on this item.
Move to approve.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your work on this. Next is item 8, one of my favorite topics, the property update.
We're going to get a chair engraved with Mary and Neil's name on it for this committee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every month.
It's whatever chair that Jeff DeWitt was sitting in. That's the one, you know, it's.
Here you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. We're here today to provide an update on the asset reviews that were performed by the Aviation Water Services departments. In addition, we're seeking approval on the disposal of 3 excess transit parcels. And finally, we're going to be seeking approval on a modified excess city-owned property policy. With us today, in addition to Mary Vivian Withrow from the Finance Department, we also have Tammy Fisher from Aviation and Brandy Kelso from the Water Services Department. And actually, I was hoping we could start by getting their asset review update. And Tammy, could you start for us, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and subcommittee members. The Aviation Department owns approximately 6,000 acres of land. This includes commercial and residential property, both operating area of the city's 3 airports and also some real estate around the airports, as well as agricultural property near Luke Air Force Base. Disposal of any aviation-owned property requires the approval of the FAA. Additionally, a noise land reuse plan must be completed in accordance with FAA regulations before noise-impacted residential property can be disposed of when federal funds have been used to acquire the property. The majority of the commercial property near Sky Harbor that's not currently used for airport operations is either leased or available for lease, and we have developed a business strategy that looks at the appropriate market opportunities for that real estate so that we can earn revenue on that property until it may be needed for aviation use. There is also about 583 acres of noise-impacted residential land that was redeveloped into a commercial office park just west of the airport, and that land was acquired as residential noise-impacted land in the late 1980s, and redevelopment area or redevelopment plan for that property was approved. That's now known as Sky Harbor Center, and that is almost completely leased. There is some land left available for development, and that is also the location of the airport rental car center. The Aviation Department acquired approximately 117 acres of noise-impacted residential properties. That is made up of 781 mostly non-contiguous parcels, dominantly to the west of the airport. As I mentioned earlier, a noise land reuse plan would be completed in accordance with FAA regulations. We are in the process of selecting a consultant to help us with that land use planning process. And of course, that would be done in collaboration with the district councilwoman, as well as Community and Economic Development, the Planning Department, and of course, the community members themselves. And the idea behind that is to establish land use that is compatible with the airport. As I mentioned, we've issued an RFQ. We expect to make a recommendation to award that contract to the City Council by the end of the calendar year, and we should be able to complete that work by the end of 2016. And that pretty much sums up the airport. That, again, the land that we own is for Sky Harbor, Deer Valley, Goodyear, and as well as the agricultural land near Luke Air Force Base.
Thank you. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, at this time, we'd like to ask Brandy to provide an update on the Water Department's excess land.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I wish I could summarize the water departments in just 4 buckets like that. As you can imagine, the water department, we have hundreds of parcels of land. We have over 200 remote facilities that supply booster stations, reservoirs, lift stations. We also have our water treatment plants, both water and wastewater treatment plants. Sometimes those plants make up several parcels. They can be up to 40 acres large, and came from maybe 5, 10 parcels. And so when you actually look at our parcel list, it's quite extensive. We have done an enormous amount of work to go through every single parcel and identify it and make sure either we have an existing facility on it, or if there's a planned facility, to master plan that parcel to make sure that it's the size we need, and that if there's excess land that we can sell, we can do that. As we're working through that, we've already identified a handful of parcels that we've given to finance to start working the process of disposing those properties. Some of them are within city limits and some are without. We do have water services outside of the city limits, in places where we've either bought water companies or we have acquired the rights to serve those parcels. So some of those parcels are within the city of Phoenix city limits and some are outside. We've also identified another 6 or so parcels that we know are probably oversized for our ultimate needs in those parcels. So we're master planning them now to then replat them and sell off the portions that we don't have. We hope to get that done in the next 3 to 6 months as we're working through all those parcels. As for the rest of our parcels, some of them are old wells that we have the rights for water resources on, and we're doing a comprehensive study on that portion to see if any of those wells we want to reinvigorate as part of our water resources portfolio right now. And so that's going to take us a little bit longer to get through all those parcels. Most of them have facilities already on them. They're just not physically connected to our system anymore. So we're going through and assessing those. So I think that's what we have for the water department update.
Thank you, Brandy.
Any questions on the water department? And just a clarification question or point then. So any proceeds that the city would receive from those sales would go to the enterprise fund of the water department, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's an important point for people to understand as we're looking at, you know, what does happen with these monies if we are able to make some sales of properties that are, you know, just not needed anymore, particularly some of those properties outside of the city of Phoenix. We've had some good success in the past with that. So, all right, great. Neil?
And now we have a brief PowerPoint to talk about our status here. One of the things that has come up recently as we are disposing of properties relates to some questions that have arisen about compatible uses and the community and nonprofit availability of some of these parcels. So what we are recommending is an amendment to our September 24, 2013 policy. And this is just a slight difference here. And it says that the council may, as a part of the authorization, dispose of the property, including neighborhood compatibility provisions and/or provisions for community benefit. If we put those types of conditions on a property, it will likely result in an RFP as opposed to an invitation to bid. Our current process with the invitation to bid is intended to maximize the dollars that we would generate from the sale of a property and move it through as quickly as possible. On the other hand, an RFP process, of course, could take into account other things such as community benefits, but I need to make sure that you're aware that will also likely result in less dollars becoming available for a given parcel of land. So as community benefits could be bid up in an RFP process, some of the dollars that would be generated from the sale will likely go So we are recommending action on this today.
We just add, that is perfectly within the council's policy authority to make that decision.
Oh, absolutely.
We just want to make it clear in the policy that that is an option, should the council choose that.
And one of the things, and I failed to mention, one of the things that we'd like to do is make sure, as we identify new parcels in a given area, is to make sure that we let the, certainly the district know that these parcels are available. You know, and after a couple of weeks, try to receive some sort of decision as to whether or not that is something that should be disposed of through an RFP process, or if they should be disposed of through the invitation to bid process and the Jones-Lang-LaSalle process. In fact, these three parcels that we have up here are all public transit parcels that were acquired for the light rail project. We have determined that they are surplus. We've approved approval from the FTA and Metro to dispose of them. And in fact, our conversations with District 8 also indicated that it was appropriate to dispose of these parcels through a bid process where we can get the highest dollar value for them. We are seeking your approval today to move these items to council to seek council's approval to dispose. The parcels are right here at 2423, 2425, and 2429 East Jefferson, located right near 24th Street, obviously. They are zoned commercial. And that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
All right, if my colleagues are in agreement, we have a card here from Greta Rogers, so maybe we can take the public comment first, and then we'll go to any questions or comments from the subcommittee. Ms. Rogers.
Thank you, Chairman Gates and members of the subcommittee. I didn't realize when I put my card in that this was on specific transit-owned property. But I spoke about a year ago on this when it came before the council formal. We have 12 to 14,000 properties that the city owns. I have all of them at home. This thick, 8.5 by 11, both sides. At that time, you agreed to put on the market, I think with Jones-Lang-LaSalle, which is fine, 12. Well, 12 out of 12,000 or 14,000 isn't even equivalent to a good spat into the ocean. We need a plan for divesting real estate that is an asset that is producing nothing for the city of Phoenix, and that the city of Phoenix has no plan for use within the next, I'll give you 24 months instead of just 12. Some of this has been on the books as long as I've been alive, and I just clocked the beginning of '86. So that isn't a good sign. We need a plan for strategy and execution to bring money into the city treasury. We're desperate, we need it. We have assets that can be sold that we aren't going to use. I'd like you to seriously consider putting together a committee of people who have had real estate experience and background. And I offered myself over a year ago, even though I know none of you look at me as a sweet cinnamon roll. And I've never been such. But I can be of help in this matter. Most of it will be probably commercially zoned. But real estate is real estate. And we need to execute a plan. We need to develop a plan and a way to execute and bring assets that are dead, the value of those, to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Councilman Nowakowski.
You know, I had a concern because one of these pieces of properties were actually sold in my district, and the community was kind of upset because of the the need in that community was more social services and all that. And I think the community benefit really needs to be looked into, and I'm glad that staff came back and is implementing the community benefit aspect of it. What happens is that once it's a commercial piece of property, we sell it, you don't know what would be built on that piece of property. It can become a drive-through liquor store, a topless bar, whatever. And if the neighborhood was actually looking for a community center and all of a sudden it becomes something totally opposite, I think the community has the right to kind of help us decide what should be built on that property or what would be the best benefit for the community. We have industrial parks that I agree that we should try to sell that property outright. But I mean, when it's in the middle of a neighborhood, when it impacts the community, I think this aspect of it, and I'll be supporting it 100%, that we should have some type of community benefit to the sale. So I want to thank staff for looking into it. I know that every time we have a process or so, we find little hiccups along the road, and this was one of the little hiccups, and thank you for the hard work in fixing what I call the problem within my district, and I think it's going to be a solution for the whole city of Phoenix.
Other questions or comments? All right. Well, I would echo Councilman Nowakowski's comments. I think I've had a couple of these already in my area, and you know, we went and engaged with the community and worked with them, got a good idea of what they're looking for and what they're not looking for. In some of these instances, to have the sort of business that Councilman Nowakowski mentioned in the area would require a rezoning process, so there the public would have the opportunity to weigh in. But there are other instances where they wouldn't, where under the current zoning it could lead to a use that the neighbors would not be supportive of. So, you know, my feeling is we have to balance this, though, with the good point that Ms. Rogers raised, which is we need to find revenue for the city. And I think this revision in the policy hits that balance well, and I think there'll be some times where we will continue to just have a bid, and we won't have an RFP, but in some instances it makes sense given the concerns of the community. So with that, we actually have two pieces of a possible motion, but do we have a motion on both the three transit properties and then also the revision to the policy?
Move to approve. I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion. It has been seconded. Any further discussion on this item? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your work on this. And this takes us now to item 9, the telephone replacement and network upgrade project update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last month, we began the presentation. The subcommittee asked us for a bit more information, so led by our Chief Information Officer, we wanted to start this with a discussion of the telephone and data system project, and then the second item companion to it would be a request for an authorization to finance the replacement of our system. With that, I'll turn it over to our Chief Information Officer, Debbie Cotton.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. We're here today, as Mr. Zerker said, at your request to give you a presentation and an overview regarding our telephone system and network upgrade project. Conducting the presentation will be the Assistant Chief Information Officer, Mr. Sweeney, and our consultant, Mr. J.R. Simmons. I thought I'd just give you just a brief bio overview of Mr. Simmons' qualifications. Mr. Simmons is the president and owner of Com Group, an independent consulting firm focused on public sector clients. Each year, Mr. Simmons' firm is selected to engage for a number of large municipalities on projects such as ours. During Mr. Simmons' 30 years as a consultant, he's taught college-level telecommunications courses, conducted independent seminars, and provided expert testimony. Mr. Simmons is the current president of an organization called the Society of Communications Technology Consultants International. So we really believe that we are in good hands by having engaged Mr. Simmons. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, our objective today is to first of all discuss with you our telephone system project and clearly demonstrate to you why the system needs to be changed and that it's no longer a matter of upgrading the system which is at its end of life. At the conclusion of our discussion, we will then turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Young, to discuss the financing strategy necessary to fund the telephone and network system project. We're obviously will be here to answer any questions that you have, but we thought it would be important for you to know that we will need your support, and we hope to secure your support today to fund this project, because without funding the project, we will not be able to continue moving forward. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Debbie. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I wanted to provide you a little bit of a background as to our current state of the technology of our telephone system as well as our data network, and the reason for why we need to move this project forward. So our current system is an Ericsson-based system. It played well since it was installed in 1988. But being a 26-year-old system, it is time, and probably well past time due, to be replaced.
And Mr. Sweeney, when
Yes.
you say the current Ericsson system, so is that just the handset, or is that also the infrastructure?
Very good question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, that is from the handset that you see at the desk all the way back into the closets and into a central switch room, which we'll show you a picture of in a moment, of what systems used to look like and what they look like for the future. But that is a very comprehensive system that's distributed in almost every facility throughout the region here. Okay. We do know that our manufacturer support for that which is delivered through a third party ends in 2015. So that means a third-party contractor has rights to get those updates and software updates and maintenance updates up through that period of time. After June of 13, we will no longer have that. The contractor that is on contract to maintain our system is still on board through December of 2016. However, they will be working now on best effort to make sure that the system remains operational. So they may be looking to the gray market to obtain parts, but should there be any software issues, we don't have rights to that intellectual property, and that was where problems will reside. So the background of our phone system is pretty grave at this point, which is why we need to move it forward. Where we know the future is really moving those things onto a data network, and we'll have Mr. Simmons speak to that in a moment. But to position ourselves to move our phone system to our data network is problematic, given that 85% of it today is at end of life. It is no longer being supported and are manufactured by the manufacturer. So within 3 years, they will support it. It will go out of support. And so 85% of our network needs to be upgraded in order to run a new phone system onto that. So with that, staff engaged through working with the city manager's office and budget and research to engage the first part of a project, which is to bring on a consultant to do a needs assessment and to tell us where the future lies for the city of Phoenix and what decision points do we have. And that's where we're working through the city council in the spring. We hired ComGroup with Mr. Simmons' organization to do that requirements gathering and analysis phase for us. Not only looking at what the businesses need, such as aviation, water, and so on, to run their business, but what also does the industry hold for us? What decision points are out there? What lessons learned are there in prior RFPs that they've been involved with? Mr. Simmons and his colleagues have finished those findings of the assessment, and we are in the midst right now of developing the RFP for the replacement of our phone system and upgrading the data network. That piece we will be coming back to later for approval. But what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Mr. Simmons to kind of talk about what those findings were, some of the knowledge that he has relative to the industry, and what our next steps are. Mr. Simmons.
Thank you. Chairman Gates, members of the subcommittee. One of the things that you should recognize is that the average lifespan of one of these systems that you have in today is about a third of what you've managed to get out of it. So you've had 3 times the life of the average system. It also helps point out just how long this system has been past current technology. As you can see from some of these pictures, the old systems were very physically intensive, a lot of electronics, took up a lot of space, and worked on a principle that the technology of which was developed many years even before it was implemented. So it's costly to maintain, and the biggest thing is that the risk has gotten to the point where it's not a question of will the system fail, it's a question of when the system will fail, and because of the lack of support, at that point it'll be a catastrophic event. The system will have no telephone service for potentially an extended period of time because the parts and the knowledge to repair it could be absent. So there's a lot of components, a lot of parts to this that are put it at risk, and there's also a lot of technology development that's taken place that has completely changed how we approach telecommunication systems. So the new systems are, this button. The new systems are completely different in that they don't ride a dedicated voice network anymore, they ride the data network. All phone systems do this and have since the middle of last 10, 12 years ago. It was about the time that we saw the complete transition to where telecommunication systems became integrated with data networks. So now, as you can see off to the side, onto the left side, the servers, instead of that big room of all those cabinets, they're down to servers. They're down to software-generated devices and components. Because servers are running them, they're much more efficient and much more compact. So we not only save in space, but we're using industry-standard hardware instead of dedicated proprietary hardware. The type of networking and connections you see in the middle are the same data networking that we'd use to extend computers and services to everybody throughout the city. So one of the advantages of this project is we're going to be upgrading the data network and the voice network at the same time. But it's not just an advantage, it's a necessity. We have to do them together. They're very much a linked project. The end-user devices that we end up with then are not just basic telephones anymore. For some people, that's all they would need, but it allows us the technology to find more cost-effective ways of extending telecommunication services. In some cases, it may be a cellular phone or a tablet or a PC running software, something else to give them service instead of buying just more and more telephone hardware. So the new mechanisms that we get, the new features and capabilities that are on the new systems, allow us to save money. And so fundamentally, we're getting out of an old technology that's costly and has a lot of risk into the current technology with much better business continuity and reduces all the risk, at the same time gives us opportunity to save money. However, it does take an investment to get there from here.
Just one question on that. I mean, rough numbers, how much cheaper will it be to operate the new system on a percentage basis?
It's hard to say because a lot of the costs today are in labor costs that are as events occur. So for example, we're seeing about 30 outages of the system per month that we have to service. It takes time, effort, and technology as well as people. We typically see about a 30% reduction in the amount of time, effort, and money it takes to maintain the newer systems. Sometimes that can be even less depending upon additional factors that are unique to each client.
And who is it that's doing that support now? Or is that the outside group then? And don't we just pay them a standard fee, or do they actually charge us per incident?
There's some of each. Some of the services they provide are on a fixed fee basis, and those fees will come down. And then some services they provide are on an additional, on top of that charge. Those all come down. With the new systems, a lot of this work becomes integrated into regular processes. So internal staff will be able to take on a lot of these capabilities with the new tools that allow you to manage and repair and fix and move things around. It's a lot less expensive to maintain a system and takes a lot less time and effort. So that allows us to reduce our dependency and cost with the outside vendor, as well as be more efficient at it.
And just real quick as well, will this allow us to go to a unified call center? Is this a necessity if we want to go to a unified call center as a city?
Yes.
Okay. Councilman Nowakowski, did you have, I apologize. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So this I think might be our second to last point on this anyway. There's a lot of users that don't need a very complex solution. So we're not going to be spending money on unnecessary things. A lot of folks just need a basic communications, but reliable ones, something that we can count on removing the risk. At the same time, the call center features that you're asking about, Chairman Gates, some of those things will be fundamentally a part of the system, used where they need to and where it saves us money. So we right now have, like the water department has a standoff system of their own. They have a couple components that are not shared throughout the city because they're just for the water department. By getting a unified system in, we'll be able to leverage those types of investment across the city for any department that would need those type of capabilities. And again, as I mentioned, it also allows us to give different tools to make us more effective without spending money on old technology. And then a big part of it is the workforce in general. In fact, the population's become very mobile. So where appropriate, we're going to leverage mobile devices as part of the solution. And that's, again, tablets, smartphones, et cetera, because those are a much more cost-effective way and increase effectiveness.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, in conclusion, we are aware that you want us to explore all opportunities for the procurement of this system. So we want to assure you that the RFP will include all potentials, as we talked about there on the slide. So we can host this in a cloud environment with a third-party vendor. We can have someone manage the service for us. We could host it on premise, and we're also going to explore lease versus buy. After we are able to issue the RFP, we will obviously come back to you with those recommendations for your approval, and so that we may proceed. In terms of next steps, we would like to return to you in November or December for approval to issue the RFP along with evaluation criteria so that we can have that information available from a transparency perspective. After the RFPs are received, we would be back to you in a June 2015 timeframe with a recommendation for a vendor selection. And Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, that concludes our presentation. We're available to answer any questions you might have.
Before we go to any questions, I have a card here from Ms. Rogers to comment both on this item and item 10. Ms. Rogers, would you like to speak on each one, or do you want to just... Yeah, do you want to speak now, or would you like to speak during item 10? Why don't we go ahead and do it now then, if that would be all right? Thank you.
Chairman Gates and members of the committee. This item was brought to my attention about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I wasn't aware that we had discussed this kind of preliminarily last year, but that's neither here nor there. Was Mr. Sweeney and ComCon chosen by RFP?
Mr. Sweeney, can you answer that question?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Mr. Sweeney is an employee of the City of Phoenix, and Com Group is a professional firm that we selected through a solicitation process and was competitively bid, so yes.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cotton. I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to these subjects. I know how to use a telephone. I don't own a computer, nor am I planning to buy one. But I understand the necessity of this coordination between telephone and computer or IT communication, and I don't disparage it. I would like to have some idea of how you came to the conclusion that the cost will be 35 to 36 million, and also to find out if there is any leading going on here by the City of Phoenix for a desired result of an ultimate vendor. And if so, I want it fully and honestly exposed. Because if it is, it's collusion and it's leading and it's unlawful. And I have inside information that this is maybe going on. I want you, all 4 of you, to be on target with this and not to let it slip under the table. We need updating of this whole system. There's no doubt about it. I question why 4% for revenue bonds. That seems a little high in today's market of interest for secured bonds. I question that, and I want it studied and looked into. And I know we're not predicting for tomorrow, but I want this whole thing very carefully and surgically vetted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. First of all, obviously here today, this particular item is not for action, but as has been laid out here, and I think at the request of my colleagues and I, that you look at all the options, because there are a lot of options, and there's not just one way to do this, But for me, and I assume my colleagues would agree, we want the best possible service, the best possible infrastructure moving forward. Maybe not necessarily that it can last for, 25 years or 30 years, but as many years as it can. But then at the same time, again, needs to be at the lowest cost possible. And so I know that we will all have that focus here. We'll be following this very closely. I know everyone here takes this very seriously. A few years ago, we went down this road already, and we stopped. So this has not been moved through at a lightning pace, and this has to be done right. So that's just make those comments on that. Other questions or comments from my colleagues on this item? Councilor Nowakowski.
I think it's great that we're moving to a data network. I mean, it's about time. I think that we should really look at what's in the future. I think Phoenix can be the role model for other cities on how to save money, and I mean, just the technology that's out there. I mean, running 9 radio stations, the technology that we use, that we have our headquarters here in Phoenix, and instead of hiring 9 DJs, we have 1 DJ that covers all 9 markets, and we use technology to do all that, and it makes it sound local in each of those markets. So I really want to look at what is the phone systems are going to look like in the future, and how can we be compatible to that. I mean, we just went to Mexico City to open up our trade office, and one of our newest station in Fresno has a line 2, which is all it's through the iPhone and iPads, and I was able to use one of our lines on the Wi-Fi, and there was no cost to it. And basically all of our employees in our Fresno station has a iPad, and they just hook up a headset to it, and that's their phone. And they can actually use it at home, they can use it at the station, or wherever there's a Wi-Fi connection to it. How can we start looking into that where we don't have to buy all this hardware or phones, and we can just plug into, if it's an iPad, if it's a computer, and it's just purchasing a headset. I really want to look into what the future looks for the phone systems for big systems like what we have. I really want to be the pioneers in this when it comes to cities. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about the whole cloud and hosting and all that. Maybe we can set up a meeting outside of this and talk about that, because it's amazing what's out there right now.
Thank you, Councilman. I couldn't agree more. And that is, the disadvantages are our infrastructure is so old, but the advantage is we get to make a quantum leap. And I think we can be real pioneers, again, doing it in a cost-effective way. Other comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, I think as we transition to the next item, one thing I want to make sure we cover is a large portion of, and to Ms. Rogers' question, a large part of this cost is really getting the cabling right in this building. Yes, can you just talk about that a little bit, unless it's part of item 10?
No, I think it's appropriate to understand that this is also one reason why it's such a big project, is because it is all interrelated. So we have cabling costs, we have the data network infrastructure costs, we have HVAC to make sure that it all stays up and running. Power has to be, UPSs have to be in place, et cetera. So it's not unlike if you're building a building, you have to have the infrastructure of the building first before you can do the finishing touches. And it also means it's a long project. This is a project that's going to take a couple years to finish, because we have to prepare all the infrastructure before we even get to the phone system component. And that's one reason why we're looking forward to moving promptly, is because we have to get going on the infrastructure before we get to the rest of it, and that's a big part of it. And if it's okay, I'd like to address one other comment that was brought up by Ms. Rogers. I think one of the reasons we're involved is because this is going to be a very open process. There is no vendor that is coming in with it already in their pocket or anything like that. And it violates the ethics of my organization to go about a project in that way. And as president of the organization, I have to uphold those ethics.
I have a question. So who is our provider for our fiber, our internet,
There's a mix of
data.
services in place. So the city actually owns some of its own infrastructure. There's also provisions, fiber, for example, coming from the cable company, from the telephone company. We use those services where they're effective as well. Then the phone system itself comes from Black Box is supporting it. It's the Ericsson system, which is actually now owned by a company called Mitel. And then Cisco is our primary data networking components. But the RFP is going to look at replacing the data networking components, and it's even possible that Cisco will not be our provider of those going forward. So everybody is in play, so to speak.
Because I know there's competition out there. I mean, you got Google Fiber, you got Cox coming up with their fiber also. And I think it's a great opportunity for the city of Phoenix to take advantage of that competition that's out there, right?
Absolutely.
All right, unless we have any other comments, and do you want to move into the presentation on item 10?
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm here with Randy Petrowski, esteemed city treasurer. We had gone through this presentation, I think last month, and we were asked to defer it until this month. I'll briefly go through this. Total cost, as we have discussed, is $35.6 million. The annualized debt service is estimated at $6 million, amortizing that debt service over the useful life of the equipment of 7 years with an estimated interest rate of 4%. The interest rate is estimated at 4% because if we put up 1% and we were low, the debt service would be higher than we expected. So it's just merely an estimate. The actual debt service and interest rate will probably go through a negotiated sale using our underwriters and the investors. So ultimately, we will get the best possible interest rate available. The general fund portion is $21.4 million. The estimated general fund debt service is $3.6 million, again, estimated at 4%.
Can I just add that $3.6 million is already baked into our budget estimating for as we move forward, just so it's not a surprise in that regard.
So it's already in the 14-15 budget? No.
I don't think it would start, the payments start this year, right?
It would start in the subsequent fiscal year.
Okay.
Excise tax revenue bonds, we use them very selectively to fund capital and equipment needs, such as this building is an example. The court building is another example. The debt service is paid with excise tax revenues, our sales tax receipts essentially, and it must be approved by City Council. It does not require voter approval. We have very strong credit ratings as it relates to our excise tax credits. We have the opportunity to use excise tax revenue bonds to finance a capital equipment over time, at the same time minimizing our annual budget impact, and in today's environment, a very low cost of capital. Excise taxes include the items that we have listed on the slide here: sales taxes, state shared taxes, franchise fees, licenses and permits, but do not include dedicated excise taxes for things such as transit, T2000 taxes. Our credit rating on our senior lien excise tax is a AAA with S&P and an AA1 with Moody's. Our subordinate, you can see AA3 with Moody's and AA with S&P. We are looking to move forward in obtaining City Council approval on the excise tax bonds. By getting approval to move forward with the excise tax bonds means we get to do preliminary work to ensure that things get done timely and appropriately. Does not mean that we have to issue excise tax bonds. So if there is some other funding mechanism that comes out in the RFP process that's more cost beneficial, we can back away from issuing the excise tax bonds and not issue them at all. We are working on a regional wireless cooperative 700 megahertz project. Excise tax bonds have been authorized by council for that project. Combining the two makes for a much more efficient process in the event that we do decide to issue with the excise tax bonds for the telephony. So overall, our recommendation would be to obtain council approval. We can defer that for a couple more months if that is the decision. We would definitely need to start working on this in February. We can pull back if there's another opportunity that is a better financing opportunity that comes out of the RFP, and we're looking to make it the most efficient process as possible. So by council recommendation, if you were to approve council reviewing this item, doesn't mean we have to issue the bonds, just means we get to move forward and prepare the financing in the event that it's most cost beneficial to do so. We'd also amortize those bonds over the useful life estimated at 7 years of the equipment. That concludes the presentation.
Questions from my colleagues?
I was just thinking, can we actually have the RP go out, figure out what the cost is going to be, and if we needed to issue the bonds, can we do that process afterwards? Because what I'm afraid of is if we issue the bonds prior and people know that we have this large amount of money that we can actually spend, then I don't think we'll get the true best value out there. I like to see somebody come in with the lowest bid and what's the best value for the city of Phoenix, and then go after the financing. Is that possible?
Mr. Chairman, Councilman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, yes, it is possible for us to do that. We just want to be sure that you understand that if that's the approach the council would like for us to take, we will not be able to begin the project. Because as Mr. Simmons has said, the lion's share, approximately 60% of the money for this project, is to build up the network infrastructure, the cable, the networking components. All of that is at its end of life expectancy. It will be out of support in 3 years. So we can certainly do that, but the project will be delayed by that amount of time.
Also, Mr. Chairman, Councilman Nowakowski, by delaying beyond February, the decision beyond February, we're likely to have to issue, if the decision was to issue excise tax bonds for this project, we'd have to have 2 issuances, one for the 700 megahertz project, the other for this, and it's just additional costs that we'll be paying bond counsel and underwriters fees, et cetera. So it becomes less of an efficient bond issuance.
Questions or comments from my colleagues? I'd like to delve into that a little bit more. So right now we're scheduled to do this other bond issuance.
Correct.
And when's that?
It would be in June.
Okay, June of next year. So maybe you can put the slide back on there with the timing of the RFP.
Nope.
It's in
I
the
don't think I
previous
can do that.
Or is that in a different one?
We can get it up for you.
Because I think Councilman Nowakowski makes a good point. And actually, let's look at these dates first.
That's the one.
Okay.
Yes.
So you go out, you're going to do some more research and come back to this subcommittee in November, December to request approval. So at that time, are you going to say, again, you're just going to say like, well, we want to do an RFP and we're going to look at all these different options. The cloud, the managed service, lease versus buy, right? You're not going to come back to us and say, we've decided cloud is the way to go.
Correct. The purpose of us returning in November, December, is to get approval to issue the RFP,
Okay.
which will be an open RFP to consider all the options as listed above.
So then you come back to this subcommittee, assuming that's gone forward, with recommendations in June of 2015.
Yes.
If at that time we say, okay, now we know you've recommended one of these approaches, to Councilman Nowakowski's point, why couldn't we then say, okay, great, we're going this way, then we would, we would approve going forward with the excise tax bond financing? Because then that would be a different time than the other one? Or?
Mr. Chairman, the council certainly could decide to go with an excise tax bond after the recommendation in June of 2015. That will require a separate issuance and higher bond costs. It's just less efficient to issue bonds twice as opposed to once. And I just want to make sure it's very clear that just because there is a council authorization to issue bonds doesn't mean we would have to do so if there's some other more cost-effective method of achieving that result as a result of the RFP.
So what you're saying, I mean, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. What you're saying is then, if we waited until then, that bond issuance would have to be at a different time than the other one. And what roughly are the costs, what are the cost efficiencies or cost savings for doing it all at once?
Mr. Chairman, the period, it would take at least an additional 5 months likely to issue bonds from the date the council chose to move forward. I'm going to ask Randy Petrowski to describe the additional costs.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Mr. Chairman, committee members, for a bond sale, cost of issuance usually run approximately $400,000 to $500,000 per issuance. So if we have to do 2 issuances, that would be approximately the additional cost.
Comments from my colleagues? Other questions?
So I think one way to view this is we're not saying we're going to issue bonds. What we're saying is we're going to do all the work necessary so that if we need to, we've done it in the most cost-effective and timely way possible. It's sort of like pre-qualifying for a mortgage, maybe. It's much more complicated than that, but in effect, the work that would happen right now would be sort of that pre-qualification work, so that when we're ready, and if we're ready to do it, we're not having to go through the steps with the bank to get the money, which takes time. We're ready to go right when we need it. And if we don't need to, we don't. And so we can come back and regularly update the subcommittee on that status so that you are comfortable with where we are in that process.
And to that point, Mr. Chairman, let's say, for example, the authorization was for $35 million, and that's what council provided. If the bids come in at $34 million or $32 million or $30 million, we could adjust the amount that we issue accordingly to make sure that we're just covering the cost of the system.
Just another question. So if the subcommittee and then the full council approved you sort of like as you described it, Ed, doing the pre-qualification process, what if the item then came back to the council later on saying, okay, now, or maybe this is what would happen anyway, actually saying, okay, now we're looking for council approval to issue the bonds? Or is it that if this subcommittee approves it today or at some point and then the full council approves it, you don't need to come back to the council to actually, you have all the authority you need to move forward with the issuance?
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct, if
Okay.
council approved it.
But when we would come back with the actual product itself, that would also be a notification point as to how we're going to pay for it, right? So a part of this, I think, is we got to have some money to cable this building.
Correct.
But the other part is we got to have the money to pay for the system that's selected, which the council will authorize. And so when the council authorizes that, we'll know, okay, now Neil says it's this much in bonds. Or somebody comes to us and says, hey, we're going to propose to you a public-private partnership. You're not going to have to bond. We're going to do the financing in this way. And they run the numbers and it turns out to be more cost-effective that way. We wouldn't have to issue the bond. So that this RFP process that we've talked about allows that option as well. But if that doesn't come through, we would have our backup plan.
Any comments, questions, or I guess if there's a motion that anyone would like to put on the table, that would be in order at this time.
I'll move for approval, staff recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion to approve staff recommendation to provide staff the authority to move forward with this excise tax bond issuance at some point in the future. Is there a second? All right. I'm not hearing a second at this point. If, again, there seems to be some concern, obviously that's being shown by this subcommittee. what would be the latest point at which the council could provide this authority to go forward with the bond issuance where it would line up with the other one in June of 2015?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that the cabling that Ed is describing is the precursor to get things done. So council authority would have to be provided for that to make sure that the project goes off as planned. It's also my understanding that typically cabling of that nature is funded or is owned. It's not leased. Okay, so a large component of this project is something that we will have to pay outright for. In the absence of council approval to issue bonds for that, ITS will not be able to start cabling the building and therefore will delay the project. If everything was to go forward in one project to get the most efficient bond issuance, we would need council approval to issue the bonds late January.
All right.
Why don't we do this?
Yep.
Why don't we come back to you in November, and we will split out the amount of money for the cabling and how that financing would work, and then the amount of money that would be necessary, our guess, before we get an RFP back for all the other pieces, and we'll lay that out in more chunks to look at. And that would still give us time to be to the council before the holiday break in December and keep us on that pathway.
Councilor Nowakowski.
And also a timeline of approvals by the subcommittee and the council, and
yes,
that would be great.
Okay.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, this is a big project. Want to make sure we get this right. I think we're learning more. At least I'll speak for myself. I'm learning more about this project with each one of these subcommittee meetings. And as long as we are still in a position to stay on track and not, for example, miss out on the $500,000 in savings from having it all in one bond issuance, I think that makes sense. So we will, unless there's any objection here, we will be delving into this further. Obviously, I think staff would make themselves available for any additional one-on-one briefings with members of the subcommittee as it relates to the financing and the individual portions of it, cable and otherwise. So with that, then, if there isn't anything else on that item, that takes us to call to the public. And we've had, do we have any additional call to the public items? And then that takes us to item 12, future agenda items. And the members of the subcommittee have been provided with several additional future agenda items. Do my colleagues have any other items that they'd like to see added as future agenda items?
Mr. Chair, we'll also add the workers' compensation update that Ms. Kyle and staff have been doing some work over the summer, and we should come back and update you on what sorts of efforts we're doing to work to reduce workers' comp costs, and so we will do that.
Okay, great. Anything else from my colleagues? All right. Wonderful. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.